Can't wait to find out. Niall, what is in your notes today?
Well, your moment has arrived, Robbie. The podcaster who President Trump made deputy director of the FBI is back to being a podcaster again. I'm talking, of course, about Dan Bongino. The president called into Bongino's show yesterday for a little chat, and he said this.
And they vote illegally. And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
Those remarks caused outrage, understandably. Joe Scarborough, the MS Now host, responded on X, "Try sane washing this." And the New York Times columnist Nick Kristof noted very fairly on X, quote, "We don't know exactly what he, Trump, meant. He may not know either, but it sounds to me as if he's calling for Republicans to suppress Democratic votes." It does sound very much like that, and if it is that, it's a fundamental attack on democracy taking place in plain sight. Yet there's another part of this story that hasn't been fully recognised. Donald Trump is, as usual, posturing as strong, but these days he's getting weaker. He's not conquering all before him. He's at rising risk of being cornered. Last year, back in power, Trump steamrollered his way across the political landscape. The Democrats were still shell-shocked over their 2024 election loss, and institutions, universities, law firms, and media companies among them, bent the knee to Trump with abject eagerness. But it's been very different this year. 2026 isn't even 5 weeks old, and Trump has suffered a succession of setbacks. By far the most important, the people's victory won at steepest cost, came in Minneapolis. Renee Good and Alex Pretti, citizens of this nation, were shot dead in the street by masked agents of the government. They then had their reputations traduced by some of the most powerful people in the country. There was uproar, and that uproar fueled massive protests. And here's the crucial thing. The protesters won, for now at least. Trump softened his line. The new public face of the operation there, Tom Homan, is talking about a drawdown plan. Trump being Trump, that could change any second. But the point is that he was pushed back. And that didn't only happen in Minneapolis. He tried flexing his muscle on the global stage, suggesting he might use military might to seize control of Greenland. European nations pushed back, and Trump backed down, at least on the military part. He's tried intimidating Harvard University, and Harvard has pushed back. Trump has backed down there too, at least according to a New York Times report yesterday, indicating the administration has dropped a demand for a $200 million payment. Trump incidentally reacted furiously to that story, calling it, quote, nonsense on Truth Social last night, and claiming he was upping his demand to $1 billion. So we'll see. Trump has meanwhile backed down in another sense on his narcissistic renaming of the Kennedy Center after himself. Several artists cancelled planned appearances after that. Now Trump says the center will close for about 2 years from the 4th of July. He claims this is happening to speed along renovations. In a response to Pablo Manriquez of Migrant Insider's question about why Trump is closing the Kennedy Center for 2 years, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, "Is it renovations, or is it that he couldn't fill the seats? You tell me." But back to Trump's comments about elections. They aren't evidence that his bruised hands hold the country in a vice-like grip. They're evidence that we're entering the wounded animal period of his second term. And wounded animals, as everyone knows, are dangerous. Let's be clear. Trump's Republicans are on course to lose the midterms, in the House at least. They're defending a minuscule majority with an unpopular president who keeps doing massively divisive things. It's no surprise that polls show a clear Democratic advantage. But if the Republicans lose the midterms, the whole edifice of Trump's political tower begins to crack and teeter and sway. There would be House hearings. There would be subpoenas. Almost certainly there would be impeachments. If you're Donald Trump, there would be big trouble. Big trouble, that is, if the elections take place without impediment, if no strange confected emergency throws things off, if the president accepts the results. What clues does the evidence provide on that? He doesn't accept his defeat by about 7 million votes in 2020. He pardoned the people who rioted to overthrow that result and keep him in power. His FBI raided an election hub in Georgia just last week. And now he wants his party to somehow, some way, take over the voting. It's time to brace ourselves. We're on a collision course here, and we're on it not because of Donald Trump's strength, but because of his weakness.
You know, I see things slightly differently.
I'm sure you do.
Imagine. But one way, you're talking about examples of things where Trump has been defeated or has stopped persisting in the thing he's trying to accomplish. And I think not in every one of those cases, but a lot of it comes down to his execution strategy, which has just been very flawed given the power they've had for this past 2 years, which they're about to lose because they're going to lose control of the House, at least. They had complete control of the government, and they don't pass any laws. This, for instance, the Haiti migrant, that got reversed by a court, well, because it's just a declaration Trump made. And, we could argue whether it should be within his power to just declare it. I'd argue maybe it should be because the president should have immigration authority. But look, if you don't like the court disagreeing with him, pass a law. Just have them put into law that we're changing the immigration policies from that part. Then there will be some structure, and then if the court still disagrees, then you can rail about it. Or if Democrats vote against it, then put them on. You have them on the record, and you can go to your base and say, well, we would like to cut off immigration from Haiti, and we think most of the country would too, but Democrats are blocking it. But they won't go that route on so many of these things. They won't seek there's no legislative force to them, so they can be undone by the courts, and then Trump is just fuming and frustrated. And I think part of that is also an exhaustion that his own side feels that we're not accomplishing anything that has any staying power because it's not being put into law.
But, the fact that it's not being put into law, perhaps we actually don't disagree by that much in this score. The fact that it's not being put into law or there aren't even attempts to put it into law, that's not happening by accident. That's because Trump and people close to Trump believe a president, well, so long as that president is named Trump, should have massively expansive powers to override Congress, to override the judiciary.
And I believe I should have a pony, but it's not. There are defined powers for good reasons of the executive, and Congress is supposed to have a lot of powers, and just nobody has thought to say to the White House that, hey, if you really want it this way, tell the Congress, tell Speaker Johnson, he'll do whatever you say. And then get the Senate to do something. And if they block it, they block it. Then try it your other creative way. But they're not even trying it.
Because they don't.
Way.
But isn't the obvious logical extension of that argument to say they're not trying it because they don't believe it, that they don't actually believe that Congress should have those powers to curb him?
I think Congress has just gotten really, 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 really lazy. And it's convenient for them to not have to vote on anything, because they have all fancied themselves content creators and cable news talking heads and pundits, and they enjoy just participating in the conservative media ecosystem without having to do any real work of taking difficult votes. And this is true to some extent and then on the Democratic side, maybe they want to do something, but they're just in the minority, so there's no collaboration anymore. There's no at least we can work together to advance some bill. Amy Klobuchar is leaving the chamber to go be governor of a state, hopefully for her, because then you can actually get your way. You can actually do things you want to do. Whereas I think we would have previously thought the idea of someone leaving the Senate to go be a governor would be not traditionally the way you'd go, because Senate is more of a national profile. But there's nothing to do. There's no work to be done.
Right. I think where we perhaps disagree is I see the congressional picture as part of a much broader landscape of Trump's consolidation of power and refusal to accept any check on that power. So then you have him fulminating against judges and Stephen Miller talking about anytime there's an adverse ruling from a judge, it's an attack on whatever Miller characterizes an attack on. He characterizes it as invalid. And so that's why I think you put the judiciary stuff with the Congress stuff, with the election stuff, and it becomes a very dark and ominous picture.
Yeah, I mean, the judiciary is, I think, more active, or maybe not in a specific way, but in a general way, feels more pressured or emboldened to be active because Congress has stopped being any kind of check. I think that's true at least at the Supreme Court level, where I think they take more cases. We're like, well, somebody has to decide whether the president can do this because we know Congress is not going to object. I think they do feel that motivation. All right, Niall, what's in your notes today?
Well, today I want to start by sharing some good advice for journalists, but for us all, really. When I first came to the US more than 20 years ago, the network evening news still mattered, and so did its anchors. There was Tom Brokaw on NBC and Dan Rather on CBS, but my favourite over on ABC News was Peter Jennings. It was years later that I learnt about Peter's famous advice for younger journalists. Talk not only to the movers and the shakers, but to the moved and the shaken. In other words, don't talk only to the powerful. Talk also to those who live with the consequences of how that power is exercised. It's an instruction that too much of the media fail to live up to, especially in Washington journalism, permeated by too keen a desire for entree into the right circles and too much general deference to the powerful. Now, this might sound kind of abstract, but it's not at all. Not during a period where we have seen two US citizens, Renee Good and Alex Pretti, shot dead in the street by government agents, and where jarring, disturbing actions have been seen in many other cases too. Democrats held a forum yesterday, which some of the people most affected by these recent actions spoke at. It was very moving, and it was moving not only because of what it revealed about the big, bleak picture of where we are as a country, it was moving in the telling, concrete details of people's lives and of their grief. Here's one of Renee Good's brothers, Luke Ganger, talking about his daughter, Renee's niece.
I was talking to my 4-year-old last week when she noticed I was not doing well. I had to come here today and talk to some important people. She knows that her aunt died and that somebody caused it to happen. She told me that there are no bad people and that everyone makes mistakes. She has Nay's spirit.
And here's Aliyah Rahman, an activist who was dragged from her car, also in Minneapolis, less than a week after Renee Good was shot to death. In this clip from MS Now, you can see some of the original footage of what happened.
Then the glass of the passenger side window flew across my face. I yelled, "I'm disabled," at the hands grabbing at me, and an agent said, "Too late." I felt immersed in a pattern, and I thought of Genoa Donald, an autistic black man killed by police during a traffic stop in 2021. I remembered Mr. Sliberio Gonzalez, who was killed by ICE in his vehicle last year. An agent pulled a large combat knife in front of my face, which I thought was for cutting me, and later learned was used to cut off my seatbelt.
And here is Marimar Martinez, who was shot 5 times by federal agents last October in Chicago. Martinez was initially charged with assault after agents said she had rammed their car. Then, as CBS News puts it, quote, "The case against her fizzled as Border Patrol's story changed. The assault charges were dropped." Here she is.
I struggle every day with the physical pain and the suffering. I cannot close my hand yet to hold the pen. I try to play with the children at my school, and I am in a significant pain as I attempt to do things I was easily able to do before October 4.
Of course, other participants in these stories will have their own version of events. But here's the thing. The stories we just listened to, they didn't take place in a vacuum. They happened under a president who has demonized immigrants for years, talking about foreigners, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. They happened under a president who has given a nod and wink to violence since his first rallies a decade ago, rallies where he would encourage his supporters to, quote, knock the crap out of protesters. They happened under an administration that has fostered a culture of immunity and impunity for its armed agents, only to row back slightly when the public shouted stop. Here, from the Bulwark, are two clips of Vice President Vance 2 weeks apart.
The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. No, I didn't say, and I don't think any other official within the Trump administration said that officers who engaged in wrongdoing would enjoy immunity. That's absurd.
So part of this story is, of course, about Trump and his allies and the specifics of how they rule. And part of it is a very old story, that raw power, unconstrained, leads to a very dark place. A place where families have to live on enveloped in grief, with a precious light snuffed out. Here's Renee Good's other brother, Brett Ganger, yesterday.
As a sister, she was constant. Someone you could lean on, laugh with, or just sit in silence beside. She had a way of making you feel understood, even when you didn't have the words yet. She didn't just listen, she saw you. She believed in second chances. She believed tomorrow could be better than today. She believed that kindness mattered, and she lived that belief.
Kindness does indeed matter. Right now, it's prevalent among the people, but it's sorely lacking among the powerful.
Well, look, I feel for these grieving families of people who were killed, and I have criticized the administration for their knee-jerk response to these tragedies. I wish they would have just said, it is sad whenever someone dies, and we are going to investigate it and determine whether it was lawful or not. It could be a justified tragedy, or it could be an unjustified tragedy, and then someone will be held accountable. And I think that's how they should have reacted, rather than it's the person's fault, or I presume their motives were to do harm and thus they deserved it. The things they said about Renee Good, the things they said about Alex Pretti. I think this is hurting the administration. The perception that they are just, and certainly there have been so much misspeaking, including from J.D. Vance, about absolute immunity. No one wants police officer. What if a police officer murders his wife? He has absolute no. It's like people in law enforcement. They're government employees. We want them to be accountable to us. They work for us. They shouldn't have to take unreasonable risks for their own safety. They shouldn't be subject to smears, but they have an important job to do, and they deserve protection in that. But not absolute immunity from wrongdoing, certainly. I think where people on the right who are defending what ICE is doing would come in and say is these Renee Good was involved with or was encouraged by her partner to do something that violates the law to free from a police officer, and is there any responsibility on the tactics of these protesters that are putting people in harm's way, or the resistance being offered by blue, liberal, Democratic-run establishments to any immigration whatsoever? Does that bear any responsibility for these people being in harm's way?
So, first of all, you said at one point there that the administration's response in terms of I think we would both agree, false characterizations of Alex Pretti and Renee Good were damaging them politically, or had hurt them politically. We could agree that it was also morally wrong for them to do that, couldn't we?
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. Of course.
So the other point then, extending from that, is, although you and I have different political philosophies in various ways, as a libertarian, presumably you have extremely serious qualms about the forces of the state snuffing out a life.
Certainly, yes.
Right.
I have expressed those qualms. I am opposed to this.
But then don't the arguments about, like, oh, well, tactics and rhetoric and all that, they effectively exculpate agents of the state who have killed people?
Well, regardless of my feelings about it, you don't have the right to obstruct law enforcement. You don't have the right, if law enforcement says, stop right there, you can't just run away, you can't drive away in your car, no matter how illegitimate you might think their my philosophical views about how legitimate various taxes and regulations are have nothing to do about whether I have to follow them or pay them, right? I mean, this is a federalism issue. I prefer to have states, I'm a supporter of states' rights. I prefer to let states broadly police themselves, but my view of this is contravened by the Supreme Court, which has decided that immigration is a federal issue. And then the question becomes, why do these Democratic-run states and cities get to decide we're going to have no enforcement whatsoever, no cooperation whatsoever with the feds on immigration law, in the same way that if they'd said we're going to have no cooperation with the federal government on integrating our schools. You remember how that went? The National Guard got sent in.
But I mean, the issue is there is a debate that can certainly be had about so-called sanctuary cities and what the appropriate level of cooperation or non-cooperation is.
And I think Virginia had it right. Virginia said before Abigail Spanberger reversed this that they would detain illegal immigrants who had other criminal other criminal issues, not just simply anyone of legal status. I think that's a great compromise.
I mean, I think Renee Good and Alex Pretti were both killed in horrendous circumstances.
I mean, I do too, and I think it was wrong. Again, you said it was morally wrong. No government official should make claims that are not supported. They had no evidence about, or no reason. They had no knowledge whatsoever about what they were doing or what their motivations are, and they said something about that. And that's the lack of professionalism that I think is harming the administration's goals. Niall, what's in your notes today?
Well, Robbie, President Trump and Vice President Vance have been hitting the interview trail. One of the things their aides boast about is their willingness, particularly in the case of Trump, to take questions. And look, I'm all in favor of people at the apex of power taking more questions, more times, in more places. But it's the answers and the non-answers that are so revealing. Over the past 48 hours, we've seen a Trump interview with Tom Yamas of NBC News, and the Vice President talking with Megyn Kelly and separately with the Daily Mail. Each encounter had its viral moments, and every one of those was telling. So let's take them one by one. First of all, Vance in his interview with Megyn Kelly talked about the clash earlier this week in the Oval Office between Trump and Caitlin Collins of CNN. Now, if you didn't see that, the summary version is Collins asked Trump a question related to Jeffrey Epstein, and the president, rather than answering the point Caitlin raised, berated her, including complaining that she doesn't smile enough. Here are Vance and Megyn Kelly on Kelly's show.
She's asking a question. The president says, "Why don't you ever smile?"
Yeah.
And it's actually like so perceptive. Even if you're asking a tough question, even if you take your job very seriously, like why does it always have to be so antagonistic?
Well, I laughed because I saw online everybody was calling him sexist for saying that. And I literally said the same thing about Caitlin Collins a year ago on my show. She never smiles. Every once in a while, you have to smile. Roger Ailes used to tell us that. Every once in a while, you get remember to smile, show the viewers that you have a heart.
Have some fun.
So perceptive. Roger Ailes used to tell us that. Not how I would put it. Again, Caitlin Collins was asking an entirely legitimate question about the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. Why would anyone ask about that with a smile on their face? Now, it was sadly predictable that Trump's sexist hectoring of Collins would draw support from the 2026 version of Megyn Kelly. Is this the same Megyn Kelly who Trump once implied had been tough on him in a debate because she was menstruating? Or the same Megyn Kelly who in 2016 told ABC's Good Morning America about an encounter with Ailes, the now deceased Fox boss, much earlier in her career. Here she is.
And then it culminated in a physical attempt to be with me, which I rejected in his office. And then I contacted a lawyer. He tried to kiss me 3 times. So I rejected that. And when I rejected that, he asked me when my contract was up.
Rather a long road from there to passing along Ailes' tips on why female journalists should smile more. Anyway, the Daily Mail, to its credit, at least pressed Vance harder, specifically about the killing of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis. The public uproar that followed Pretti's death was inflamed in part because of outrage at the Trump administration's conduct. Stephen Miller tweeted, quote, "An assassin tried to murder federal agents," unquote. That's a claim for which there is not the slightest evidence, but which was retweeted by Vance. Incidentally, both the Miller tweet and Vance's retweet are still up. Here's the Mail's Philip Nieto with the Vice President.
Did you plan to apologize to the family of Alex Pretti?
For what?
For, labeling him an assassin with ill intent.
Well, again, I just described to you what I said about Alex Pretti, which is that he's a guy who showed up with ill intent to an ICE protest.
No, but if it is determined, if it's determined that his civil rights were violated by this FBI investigation, will you apologize to that
So if this hypothetical leads to that hypothetical leads to another hypothetical,
it's a real case
will
that's
I
open.
do a thing?
Vance was doing a lot of wriggling at the end there, but it was the start, the for what, that gave the game away. Anyone with any basic sense of fairness understands why Alex Pretti's loved ones are owed an apology. Trump, in his NBC interview, continued the effort to smear both Pretti and Renee Good, saying each one was not an angel, a meaningless phrase, even as the president said he wasn't, quote, happy about what had taken place. Why wasn't he happy, though? What was the basis of his discontent? Let's take a closer look at that. Here he is with Tom Yamas.
2 people out of tens of thousands, okay? And you get bad publicity. Nobody talks about all of the murderers that were taken out of our country. They don't talk about...
but it was 2 Americans.
They don't talk
who died,
about we have the smallest trucks. As an example, we've been very tough on the waters and soon, pretty much overall. But if you look at the waters where we knock out boats...
Let's go back and run the very start of that again.
2 people out of tens of thousands, okay? And you get bad publicity.
You get bad publicity. When a masked government agent shoots a mother of 3 dead at the wheel of her car, when agents disarm a man of his legally held weapon, press him to the ground and shoot him to death on the street. What's the problem for our president? It's that you get bad publicity. That's a casually indecent thing to say. We can add it to the long list of indecent things he's been saying for years. But we should pause at least to think about the rank narcissism and callousness it reveals yet again.
Well, you pick some subjects that are hard to defend the administration on. I said yesterday that I don't really get the criticism of Caitlin Collins in particular. She asks tough questions of Democrats as well as Trump, and I don't find her particularly humorless. She's just trying to do her job.
And also, how are you going to, like an Epstein question with
weird,
a smile? That's ridiculous.
That was all weird. Look, in terms of it being bad publicity, maybe that was the wrong way to put it. What I think Trump is trying to say is that, well, going back to the point I was making earlier, if you're going to enforce the law, if you're going to, Republicans would say, correct the fact that under policies of previous administrations, a large number, millions of illegal immigrants that they do not believe should have ever been allowed to enter the country, and that Republican voters don't want in the country, and that a majority of people don't want in the country, are here, and enforcing immigration law against them requires force, and innocent people have gotten hurt as a result of that, and that is tragic. But that doesn't mean they're not going to do it. And also then there is no recognition of, because the news is by its nature is commentary on things that are bad or that have gone wrong, is not recognizing that, but this has been a massively successful deportation effort, which was the administration's goal.
But has it, though? I guess is my argument.
Well, the administration would say, yes, we've gotten rid of people who are of a criminal nature, a violent nature, all that kind of thing.
Right, but at the cost of well, first of all, people, including American citizens, being shot dead, yes. And second of all, the tearing of the social fabric that has emanated from those killings, and also from the broader and more overtly aggressive ICE tactics that we have seen. One of my objections to the bad publicity quote is a point that, to your credit, you have raised from the libertarian perspective, which is you rightly, and I from a different perspective, are very skeptical of the unchecked use of government power, especially when that government power takes physical form and certainly takes the form of killing people. Trump doesn't appear to grapple with that at all. His objection seems to be he doesn't like that he personally gets bad headlines about it or it affects his poll ratings, but he doesn't seem to address the plainly more obvious and more important issues.
Well, I think from his perspective, he ran on, he was very explicit about doing a major law enforcement action against illegal immigrants, right? Was that not clear to the people who voted for him? He's now doing that, and people are saying, "Oh, what are people saying?" I didn't think. I thought zero people would be inconvenienced by this in any way.
Well, I mean, Joe Rogan, who I think you're broadly sympathetic to, is somebody who was clearly supportive of him and has clearly been very critical of these efforts because, I mean, I'm not saying that Rogan's the avatar for everybody in the world, but he's somebody who has moved from...
The state is literally the exercise of violence. And if you want government to do things, this is government doing things. This is what government action looks like. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you should want the government to do less. There's a libertarian advancement for you.
It's an argument that is so broad, though. I mean, to compare the killing of Alex Pretti and Renee Good with, like, taxation or something. I mean, come on. I understand the point you're making in the abstract, but it's not
Well,
a realistic
I mean, these
argument.
two cases they're getting lumped together, but to my mind, maybe not for you, but are somewhat different in that I think the Alex Pretti action is very, very, very hard to defend on any level, whereas the Renee Good death, while tragic, and one would have liked there to be steps that could have been taken to avoid it, was, to my mind, more directly the result of, again, an investigation should take place. I don't know whether he was justified in shooting her in the moment, but was the proximate cause her heeding, I think, her partner's call to just drive off or just drive away, a disobeying of law enforcement that you could argue was the cause here. And if people are resisting what legitimate law enforcement actions, there will be clashes between people and the police.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I don't agree with that characterization of what happened in Renee Good's case at all. You know, we have all seen the video, including the agent shooting from the side when the vehicle is clearly passing him at that point. So I think that was a frankly disgraceful action. I would certainly endorse the idea of investigations, but I think this sort of rather glib response, not from you, but from Trump and from Vance, these kind of glib responses to things that could not be more serious. The state taking away people's lives. I just find that massively inappropriate and wrong.